Well, good morning, and welcome to the Castillo de San Marcos National Monument. My name is Garin Hernandez. Everybody here calls me Gator. I am not a ranger. I am a volunteer. I am twice retired. I volunteer here because I'm twice retired. I'm retired from the U.S. Air Force, where I was a lieutenant colonel, and I'm retired from the Department of Homeland Security, where I was a special agent on the border. Since I'm retired twice, I don't do anything from Mondays through Fridays, and then on Saturdays and Sundays, I rest from doing nothing. Except for Wednesdays, where I'm part of the living history section here at the Castillo de San Marcos, specifically with the historic weapons section. I'm qualified to fire the cannons, fire the muskets. It's a blast. Get it? Bad joke. It's a blast. So on Wednesdays, I get to give talks. You are in the oldest masonry fort in North America, the Castillo de San Marcos. This particular fort is 350 years old. Now, this is the oldest fort in all of the U.S., not continental U.S., and Canada. There are two forts in Mexico that are a little slightly older, but other than that, this is the oldest fort in all of the continental U.S. and Canada. But it's the 10th fort here. There were 9 others before this one. This fort is 350 years old. I say 350, that's very old. I'm old, but I ain't 350. Not even close. But to give us an idea of what we're talking about in age, about this area, when the Mayflower arrived at Plymouth Rock with the Pilgrims, the first babies that had been born in St. Augustine were already grandparents. Okay? The first baby born in St. Augustine, Martinico de Arguelles, was born here in the year 1566. The Mayflower didn't arrive until 1620. He was 54 years old and living in Mérida, Mexico. St. Augustine is the oldest continuously inhabited city in U.S., continental U.S. and Canada. But it's the 13th attempt by Europeans to establish some kind of colony here. The first 12 failed. Everybody died. The first time a European made it to North America was one Ponce de Leon. Everybody knows the founder, legend, founder of youth, complete legend. He arrived just about 10 miles north here, a place called Pontevedra Beach, in the year 1513. You realize that is 107 years before the Mayflower and before the Pilgrims. 107 years before the Mayflower, the Spanish was already here. And because of European law, they own everything in North America, to include Canada. Obviously, the Native Americans didn't believe that. They don't own anything. But according to European law, at the time, Spain owned all of North America. But anything north of St. Augustine to the Spanish was worthless. They didn't care. So they couldn't defend it even if they wanted to. So when the British and the French are coming from the north, you can have it. You don't want it, you can have it. It's worthless. So they got to St. Augustine. From this point on, the Spanish fought. This is also the only fort in the world that was never defeated in actual battle. Nobody could ever defeat this fort. Now, it was attacked twice, very, very large attacks. The first time in 1702, they attacked this fort for 60 days. Couldn't take the fort, the British, from Charleston, South Carolina. In 1740, they attacked the fort again, the British, from St. Simon Island, Savannah, Brunswick, Georgia area. They attacked it for 32 days. Couldn't take the fort. This fort was impenetrable. Now, this is an extremely powerful fort. Remember, I said this is the 10th fort here. There were 9 others before this fort, but they were made out of wood. So they either rotted out or got burnt down. After 9 times of the forts being burnt down or rotting away, the citizens of St. Augustine start petitioning the King and Queen of Spain for a good fort. The 9th time the 9th fort was burnt down by a pirate, a real pirate who attacked St. Augustine, burnt down fort number 9. So they write to the King and Queen of Spain that they need a strong fort to defend themselves. Now, St. Augustine was very, very small. Only about 1,000 to 1,500 people lived here in St. Augustine. There was absolutely nothing between here in Havana, Cuba, and here in Charleston, South Carolina. Nothing but woods. But the King and Queen of Spain, specifically Queen Regent Mariana, decides to spend millions and millions of dollars to put a powerful fort here in St. Augustine. Now, there's only 1,500 people. There's nothing here. Why would the King and Queen of Spain decide to spend that much money back in 1672 to build such a powerful fort when they have big cities like Madrid, Mexico City, Havana, San Juan, with hundreds of thousands of people? They could use like millions of dollars there. Why would they build it here? Why would they spend that money in this place out in the middle of nowhere? And to understand that, you have to go back in time. You got to go back to the year 1492 and a guy named Christopher Columbus. Now, it's pretty well accepted that Christopher Columbus was not the first European to make it to North America. There's plenty of evidence the Vikings were here hundreds of years before Columbus. And thousands of years before the Vikings, the Clovis people came from Siberia, down Alaska, into the Americas, tens of thousands of years before the Vikings. So Columbus wasn't the first person to get here. But what Columbus did was very, very important. He wasn't the first person to make it to North America. He was the first person to make it here and make it back. The rest of them got here, couldn't figure out how to get back, and they died here. Columbus figured out how to make it back. What he did was pretty smart. Now, Columbus was a very good navigator, and he read a lot. Back then, in the late 1400s, most of the gold and all the silk came from China and India. And it came by horseback and camel across the Silk Route. But Spain wanted to go to China and India using ships, which could carry thousands of times more than a horse. The problem was that to go from Spain over to India, they had to go around Africa. And Spain did not have any ports on the African coast. They were all Portuguese, British, and some French. So when a Spanish ship was coming back full of treasures, they were being attacked, and the treasure was being taken away from them. Or if a ship had a problem, they couldn't stop in a port in Africa because they didn't have a port to be safe. So they needed to find a way to get to India without having to go around Africa. Now, like I said, Columbus was a good navigator. He read all. He knew that the winds in Spain, France, England, always headed east. Always heading east. So he couldn't take a sailing ship and go west. The winds blocked them. But if they went down the African coast, down to the Canary Islands, Cape Verde Islands, the winds headed west. And he knew by reading, because he had never been to India, that over by India, the winds are always heading west, just like Africa. And over by China and Japan, the winds are heading east, just like Europe. So he says, the winds are coming off Africa, heading west, hitting India, curving, going up to Japan, coming back to Europe. The winds are doing this. So if I take a ship, go down to the Canary Islands, catch the winds, I will eventually make it to India. Then come up north, go to Japan, catch the winds, and come back. What Columbus didn't know is that there are two really big land masses, we call North and South America, in the middle. And there's actually two winds doing this. So he gets on his ship, goes down to the Canary Islands, catches the wind, and starts heading west. Now, Columbus had never been to India, but he read a lot. And he knew that offshore India, to the east of India, there were a bunch of islands. We know them today as Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Taiwan, Philippines. Those are the islands. And that once he gets past those islands, he'll be in India. So he starts heading west, confident that he's going to hit these islands before he gets to India. So when he arrives in what is today the Bahamas, the Bahama Islands, he thinks he's just offshore India. But once he gets past these islands, he's going to make it to India. But he wants to go back and tell the King of Great Spain, I made it, got to India. So he's going to head north, catch the winds, and head back. But he needs to bring evidence that he was there. So he takes some native that he gets off the Bahamian Islands, takes some of the natives back. He goes to the King and Queen of Spain and says, I made it to India. And to prove it, I brought back some Indians. Now you know why the Native Americans here are called Indians. Because Columbus was completely convinced he was in India. He didn't know until his fourth voyage that he was nowhere close to India. He wasn't even close. Now, when the Spanish get here, to the New World. They find that between Cuba, Florida, and the Bahamas, there's a very powerful ocean current. We know it as the Gulf Stream. So a ship could get on the Gulf Stream and get carried north very fast. Only one little problem. The Gulf Stream goes to Ireland, England, Iceland. The last place the Spanish want to take the treasure is to England. But remember how I told you the winds come off Africa, hit, and go back and make this curve? Well, modern meteorology has shown that they start heading west at about 5 degrees north latitude, about. They make that curve, and they start heading back east at about 30 degrees north latitude. St. Augustine is 29.9. So they can take the ships, come down to the Canary Islands, the Cape Verde Islands, catch the winds west, go to the Caribbean, catch the Gulf Stream north to St. Augustine, and come back. This was like a Coast Guard station in the middle of nowhere, that if a Spanish ship, treasure ship, had a problem, they could bring the treasure here, keep it safe until the next ship came by. We see that every year with the hurricanes. They come off the African coast, Cape Verde Islands, they hit the Caribbean, they curve, and they head back. Columbus figured it out without having satellites. So they decide they're going to build a very, very powerful fort here to protect the treasure. By the way, all the treasure that came out of the New World, to include the treasures from China, Japan, and India that went to Spain, crossed right in front of this fort. All of it. Almost trillions of dollars worth of treasures crossed right in front. That's why this place is so important. Now, they decided to build a fort here. Big, strong fort, a fort that would rot and wouldn't burn. Now, forts are made out of rocks. Really, really, really big rocks. Where are you guys visiting from? Annapolis. All right. Where are you visiting from? Where? Atlanta. Where are you guys visiting from? Atlanta. Okay. You guys have rocks. We're in Florida. We don't have rocks. We got alligator swamps and mosquitoes. So how do you build a fort that doesn't rot and doesn't burn if you don't have rocks? Well, you could ship the rocks in, bring them in. But boy, that'd be a lot real expensive. The only thing they found that they had available that didn't rot and didn't burn was a substance called coquina. Now, coquina is not a rock. Coquina are very, very small shells of a clam called the Donax radialis, about the size of your fingernail, not that big. When the clam dies, the shells stay on the bottom of the ocean, and after thousands of years, they get packed together, pressed together, and they form coquina. The whole island, Anastasia Island, is one massively big bank of coquina. So it would rot, it didn't burn, so they decided to make the fort out of these shells. All you have to do is cut it out of the ground with a saw. It's about as hard as your fingernails. It's not very hard. So they cut these massively big blocks, they put them out in the sun for 2 years or more to dry, and they start building the fort. They built the 4 outside walls and the corners. This section you see today that you are in, that's the new section. This section that you are in, construction on this didn't start until 1738. That's almost 45 years before the U.S. even existed, and this is the new section. That wall back there, that is original in the 1600s, 1670s. That wall is over 100 years older than the U.S. even existed. So they decided to build the 4 outside walls with 4 corners. It takes them 23 years to build just the outside walls and the 4 corners. About 400,000 blocks of coquina. They finished in 1695, the 4 outside walls. 1702, 7 years later, the British attacked. They attacked from what is today Charleston, South Carolina. They surround the fort. They cannot get close to the fort because the cannons reach out 3 miles. So they can't get close to the fort. A ship has to stay these 3 miles away or they get sunk. So they drop their soldiers off about 3 miles and they surround the fort. Now the fort was designed as a fort, but the main thing it was designed was as a warehouse to store the treasures. The bars you see there, they're so that people don't break in and steal what's inside this warehouse. Everybody lived downtown. Now the fort was also designed that if anybody attacked, the entire city of St. Augustine could come in here and live for up to 60 days. About 1,500 men, women, and children lived in this fort for 60 days. Why 60 days? Well, that's how long it would take them to send a messenger from St. Augustine to Havana, Cuba, by rowboat. There's the winds and the current are going opposite. There's no cars, there's no phone, no internet, no radio. Send a rowboat down to Havana, Cuba. Tell the authorities St. Augustine is under attack. Get the fleet together, come up and rescue St. Augustine. In 1702, on day 59, the Spanish fleet shows up there. The British get caught off guard. They have to sink their own ships and walk back to Charleston. Couldn't take the fort. 1740, the British try again. This time from Georgia, General James Oglethorpe. But after 32 days of attacking this fort, 28 of those days were actually firing at this fort. He realized, one, he cannot take the fort, it's too powerful. Two, he has no idea when that armada is going to come up to wipe his people out. And three, it was June, the beginning of hurricane season. So he, after 32 days, he walks back to Savannah, basically Savannah, 679. Could not defeat this fort. Now, what was going on? Remember I said that the big forts are made out of rocks, really big rocks. Well, when a cannonball hits a rock, it's like a battering ram. It hits until the rock shatters, the walls fall down, and they get thrown in the fort. But remember, this is a rock, this is coquina. Now there are three things in this life. There are things we know, things we don't know, and then there are things that we don't even know that we don't know. This is a perfect example. The Spanish knew that this fort was going to be attacked. It was going to be attacked by cannons. They knew it. So the first thing they did is they made this fort short. It's not very tall like those forts in Europe, really tall forts, really short. So it's hard to hit. From the Bridge of Lions, the fort's only this big. That's all it is. That's all it is. From the Volano Street Bridge, it's about that big. It's about that big. That's all you can see. Extremely hard to hit. This fort was not hit by cannonballs very often. You can count on your fingers how many times it was hit. It didn't get hit at all. Second thing, they knew that they were going to have to be here for about 60 days. So they needed to feed, maintain everybody, 1,500 people in here for 60 days. How did they do it? Well, all these rooms were full of provisions. Rice, corn, wheat, whatever they could put. A human being can live several weeks without food. He cannot live more than a couple days without water. This fort is on top of fresh water. There are 3 wells. 2 of them we closed off. We left 1 open. We popped that well open. There is fresh water down there. It is drinkable. I wouldn't drink it, but it's drinkable water. That's why they built the fort here, not somewhere else. Even though we're right next to the ocean, we're on top of fresh water. Now, the danger of a fort like this is human waste with all the diseases. So the Spanish built, right under that stairs, a tidal toilet. When the high tide comes in, it fills the toilet with water. When the high tide goes up, low tide, it flushes the toilet. Twice a day, the toilets automatically flush. Self-flushing automatic toilets in the 1600s, right there. Now, 1,500 people need also fresh meat. So the moat, and I hate to tell you this, moats do not have water in them. That's Hollywood. Moats are dry. When your can reaches out 3 miles, what do you need water in the moat? You always get within 3 miles of this fort anyways. Now, in the moat, they put their cows, their pigs, their sheep, their livestock. So the cannonballs and bullets fly above them, they have fresh meat to eat. But 1,500 people for 60 days generate a lot of garbage. What do you do with the garbage? You can't go out and throw it. British will kill you. Well, there's a room right here that used to be an old gunpowder room. Have you been in that room that you have to duck in to get out of it? It was useless. They couldn't put gunpowder. It had no ventilation. That's what they threw in the trash. So they were all set for 60 days. The British attacked in 1702. Now, remember I told you that there were things that the Spanish knew and the Spanish didn't know. Well, the Spanish did not know what was going to happen when a cannonball hits this fort. Nobody had ever built a fort out of shells before. Is it just going to pulverize the shells? They had no idea. So they knew it was going to get hit by cannonballs, but they didn't know what was going to happen when a cannonball hits the shells. So since they didn't know, they made the walls extra thick. The walls at the bottom of the fort are up to 19 feet thick. And up top, they're up to 9 feet thick. They made them very thick. Now, what the Spanish didn't know, was coquina, the nature of coquina. Now, remember I said coquina, it's not a bug. Coquinas are little bitty clamshells. If you take your two thumbnails and you put them together like this, you will notice that they only touch in one spot. The rest is air, it's empty. So coquina has millions and millions or billions of tiny air pockets. Spanish didn't know that. Now remember when a cannonball hits a rock, hit it till it shatters? Well, when a cannonball hits coquina, instead of shattering, the coquina sucked the cannonball. Just like you take a block of styrofoam, you fire a BB into it, what happens? It just slides in. Nothing happens. The few times the fort was hit, the cannonball only went in about 12 to 18 inches, and the walls are 19 feet thick. Nothing happened. Now, it's very interesting because when General Oglethorpe is writing back to the king, saying why he could not take St. Augustine, one of the things he writes is, the fort is impenetrable. The fort swallows cannonballs. They had no idea. They just got it. Now, 1740, the British tried for the last time. They can't take the fort. The fort was not defeated. Now, remember I told you it changed hands 5 times? Well, in 1760, there's a war going on between France and England over a country called India. Remember the one that Christopher Columbus was trying to get to? It's called the 7 Years' War. They're fighting over who's going to be take command of India. Well, the French king and queen and the Spanish king and queen, they're related, they're family. So the Spanish joined forces with the French to fight against the English. Well, the British win the war. But during the war, they did something really important. They seized Havana, Cuba, and Manila in the Philippines. Remember how the Spanish ships had to go to Havana, treasure ships to get back? Well, Havana and Manila were so important to the Spanish that in the peace treaty, the Paris Peace Treaty, 1763, they tell the British, okay, give us back Havana and Manila, and we will give you Florida. The British say, okay. They signed the first Paris Peace Treaty, 1763. This becomes British. The British army walks in, gives their salute, I don't know, maybe ale or something. The Spanish salute with their sangria. The Spanish walk out. This becomes a British territory. Piece of paper. Now, Florida, La Florida, Spanish Florida was a whole lot bigger than what you see today. It was what is today Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, all the way to the Mississippi River, and parts of Tennessee was Spanish. It was so big that the King of England decided it's too big. He splits it in half, about the Apalachicola River. East Florida, with the capital of St. Augustine. West Florida, the capital was in Pensacola. So they become 2 additional colonies. So in 1776, when the U.S. declares its independence, there are 15 colonies here, not 13. That's why you will always hear them say the original 13 colonies, because colony 14 and 15 stayed loyal to the king, did not join the American Revolution, fought against the other 2. So every time you hear them say the original 13 colonies, remember, 14 and 15 didn't join. So the American Civil War breaks out. Spain is still really, really, really upset that they lost Florida. They want to stick to the British. Now the British have this problem with these American rebels. So the Spanish start funding the American Revolution through Louisiana, which was Spanish, New Orleans. New Orleans was Spanish. And a guy named Bernardo Galvez, he starts funding, sending money, guns, gunpowder, clothing to Washington's army. Obviously, the British find out. They tell Spain, if you don't stop that, we're going to declare war on you. But by then, Louis XVI, the King of France, declares war on Great Britain. The King and Queen of France, the King and Queen of Spain are related. So Spain declares war on the U.S. And that next General Galvez, Bernardo de Galvez, the general, to openly attack the British. First thing he does, he attacks Baton Rouge, what is today Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Takes Baton Rouge away from the British. Comes down and attacks Mobile. Takes Mobile away from the British. Now, Galvez was a general and he understood war. He knew that the entire British war effort was based on the Royal Navy, bringing soldiers, guns, equipment from England to fight the American Revolution. The Royal Navy could not dock in Boston. They had a tea party there, the Boston Tea Party. Couldn't go into New York Harbor because the entrance to New York Harbor is really, really, really small. And they get trapped in there. They couldn't go into Baltimore Harbor. They had an "Oh Say Can You See" party there, with the bombs bursting in air, and they got themselves kicked out of Baltimore. Couldn't go into Charleston. Charleston, like New York, has a very, very small entrance. The only port they could go into that was loyal to them was Pensacola. Now, he also knew that the entire strategy of Great Britain was to sail up the Mississippi River, drop off troops, and then crush Washington's army. So by him taking Baton Rouge and Mobile, he cut off the Mississippi River. The Royal Navy could never sail up the Mississippi River and attack Washington from the west. Washington was able to take few troops, concentrate them on the east, because the Spanish were defending his western side. Now, after he takes Mobile, he attacks Pensacola. Now, Pensacola is the only place that the Royal Navy can go into. Well, then the British panic, and they start reinforcing Pensacola for the Battle of Pensacola. The Battle of Pensacola was the longest battle of the American Revolution, and only 26 Americans were in it. The West was Spanish, Native Americans, and blacks. But it drained just enough troops, not a lot, just enough troops from Yorktown, that in the Battle of Yorktown, Washington wins, Great Britain surrenders, and the U.S. wins its independence. Now, in the peace treaty of 1783, when the U.S. actually becomes a nation, the U.S. is so thankful to Spain, they tell Great Britain, you got to give Florida back to Spain. So 1783, they sign another piece of paper. In walks the Spanish army, they salute with their sangria. The British army salutes with their ale, and the British army walks out. This becomes Spanish again. Piece of paper. Now, a lot of things are happening back then. We are a very simplistic society. One answer, that one reason, that one cause. Now, normally it's a whole lot more complicated than that. In the late 1700s, early 1800s, there's a guy named Napoleon Bonaparte who takes over France and kicks out the French king and queen. Napoleon Bonaparte becomes the emperor of France. Well, then he invades Spain, kicks out the Spanish monarchs, who are family to the French monarchs, and puts his brother, Joseph, as emperor of Spain. Well, the Spanish people don't like that. So they start their own revolution. But they have no money. They don't have funds to run their revolution. So they go to their friends, the Americans, and tell them, look, we helped you in your revolution. You need to help us in ours. So the U.S. starts funding the Spanish Revolution to the tune of about $5 million. And in the 1800s, that's a lot of money. At the same time that this is happening, the U.S. is a slave nation. Spain abolished slavery in the 1690s. So slaves from American plantations were coming to Florida for their freedom. The Underground Railroad ran to St. Augustine 150 years before the U.S. Civil War. The Underground Railroad ran here. There are reports and documents of slaves from as far north as New York making it here for their freedom. Well, that's causing a problem with the plantation owners, and they start complaining. Jefferson goes to the ambassador of Spain and says, "You got to give us our slaves back." And the Spanish said, "We can't do that. They're human. They're free." So the U.S. and Spain have a little political problem. Then Mexico declares its independence from Spain, breaks away. Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Peru, they start breaking away, declaring their independence, and leaving Spain. And Spain's getting nothing for it. They know that eventually Florida is going to declare its independence, and they're going to lose Florida. They're not going to get anything for it. And the final thing that nailed everything, the SS Savannah sails from Savannah, Georgia to Liverpool, England by steam power. Didn't need the wind, didn't need the current. So they didn't need to take the Gulf Stream up to St. Augustine. They could go straight from Havana to Spain and completely bypass St. Augustine. So overnight, St. Augustine became worthless. So in 1821, Spain and the U.S. get together and they sign what's called the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1821. They say, "Okay, we'll give you Spain, we'll give you Florida." Spain tells the U.S., "We'll give you Florida, you cancel the debt. And at the same time, you will fix that political issue with the slaves. Because you'll own it, you're a slave nation. Plus, we'll get something for Florida." So in 1821, they signed the Adams-Onis Treaty in the American Army. They salute with, I don't know, Kentucky bourbon, I don't know, Kentucky bourbon. The Spanish raise their sangria, Spanish walk out. This becomes American through the treaty, Adams-Onis Treaty of 1821. Now, this is a Union fort. It's called Fort Marion. 1860, the U.S. Civil War is about to start. The Union commander here realizes that when the Civil War breaks out, Florida is going to go to the Confederacy. So is Georgia. South Carolina, he's surrounded. So he takes all his troops and he abandons the fort, leaves the fort, and then takes them all north. Leaves one guy, a supply sergeant, the ultimate bureaucrat. He's in charge of the fort. 1861, Florida secedes from the Union, becomes part of the Confederacy. Confederate Army comes over, give us a fort or we'll attack. There's only one guy here, only one. And he goes, "Oh, well, I'm the only guy here, but I'm responsible for this fort. So if you sign this receipt saying that you take responsibility for the fort, I give you the fort." So the commander, "Oh, sure." They sign the receipt, he hands them the keys, and the Confederate Army is so happy that they buy him and his wife first-class tickets back north. So this becomes Confederate through a signing of an actual hand receipt. Those of you that know about the Civil War know there was no fighting in this year. There was no fighting. So most of the soldiers, almost all of them, they leave. They go north. There's nothing going on here. All the cannons in this fort, they're needed somewhere else. So they take all the cannons away. They leave about 5 of them down the water back. There's nothing going on here. Till 1862, when the USS Wabash comes into the port. A 48-gun, ironclad Union frigate with about 2,000 Marines on board. And they go to the governor and say, "You don't give us the fort, we'll attack." There's nobody here. The governor says, "All right, but I signed this receipt where I'm responsible for the fort. If you sign the receipt saying you're responsible for the fort, I give you the fort." Okay, we'll send the receipt. With the keys, in walks the Union Army. 5 times this fort changed hands because somebody signed a piece of paper. You heard the saying, "The pen is mightier than the sword"? Perfect example. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of other stories about this fort. It's 300 years old. If, after this presentation, if you have questions, feel free to ask. I'll be happy to answer. If I know the answer, I will tell you the answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll make something up. By the time you research and find out, I'll be home and gone. So thank you for visiting the Castillo de San Marcos.